These are great. I mean, really, thanks everybody for sharing these honestly deeply personal conversations. You see, this is why I like to start out with this, because this isn't just something simple I do with my job, right? This is something that we have to undergo every day in our personal lives, and we're only going to be undergoing it with more frequency as we move forward. We are just beginning, which is why this is kind of the right time, the right place, not COVID time, but right. I mean, maybe we're all home. We should be talking to our parents more, right? And zooming with them or whatever that is. So we are not going to do reporting back, because I think you all got a flavor of a lot of different nuances that we've got when we think about housing and what it means for the people, what it means for the home. So I've got a more formal presentation like we did last time, and then we've got some more breakouts and some idea rooms. We've got some county sharing that's going to go on too, to help folks learn more about some of the activities and programs you may have available in your specific county that you're in. But there is very little right now that's unique to your counties. You have some very similar trends. I'm going to share this presentation here again. We do know that, we're only going to get more and more seniors. Like, it's not just one little hump of seniors and then we're done dealing with them, right? Like, we are only going to have more and more people that are going to be aging into our rural communities. And when we talk about the older folks, like, I'm not, the baby boomers are like right here. Like, I'm talking about the older generation, folks that are like 75 and older, that those numbers are not going to get smaller. So really, when we look at profiles of our housing stocks, when we look at Loiza County, here's the year 2000, 2010. We're waiting for the new census data to come out, but we know these are fairly consistent, especially with another data point I'll show in just a minute here. But when we look at Loiza County right now, you see these kind of the bars. This is owner occupied, that people that are 35 to 44, 45 to 54. This is the different age groups, number of owners and number of renters. And when you see these two tall bars here, this is the baby boomers in the year 2000, right? They were 35 to 54 then. And then in 2010, those two bars, the big hump right there, moved over, right? Because the baby boomers got older. So now, where are we going to be next? It's going to be, I don't want to give away Muscatine. I mean, it looks very similar. But really, the little hump is going to move over. We're going to see this hump move over to here now, and it's going to be between 55 to 74. So when we look at the composition of the housing stocks, we see roughly a quarter of our homes. This is 10 years ago. So you can kind of project there's 10 years ahead with a little bit of variation of 2 to 3% is all we found here. Is roughly a quarter of the homes in Loiza County are owned by people today that are over the age of 75. A quarter, 1 in 4 of your homes are occupied by people over the age of 75. So when we talk about, like, remember the recruiting people in, like, it's hard to recruit people in when we've got all of these folks in their homes right now. But it also shows that in the next 10 years, 25% of our owner occupied homes are going to turn over, is the other way to look at this, right? We've got people moving out, we've got people moving in, houses are in high demand. These homes will not just be sitting empty. Some maybe, that we'll talk about in just a little bit here. But really, when we look at this age composition, about a quarter are over the age of 75, and another 45%, here it's 46%, are baby boomers. So put all these together, we're looking at what, like 70 to 75% of your homes are going to, of all your owner occupied homes, are going to turn over in the next 20 years. This is almost unprecedented when it comes to turnover of people in a rural community. Typically, it's a kind of a small churn. We have never had this many people that are going to be moving on, right? I'm going to say moving on or moving over, or whatever you want, or you want to call this end of life stuff, right? We have to use some words here. So people are going to be moving on, and we hope that these homes are going to be in a good enough shape for people to move in. Muscatine County, same story. Here's the big hump of the baby boomers, and they're moving over, and this hump will be moved over here once we get the new census data out. Here, again, very similar profile. The profiles we see here for your two counties are very consistent across all of rural America, where again, almost a quarter of your homes are owned by people over the age of 75. Another 45% are owned by baby boomers. You put those together, again, you're looking at like 70 to 75% of your homeowners are going to turn over in the next 20 years. So really, what's coming? Is this like a disaster? Or is this an opportunity? Like, there's been very little solid research done on this, but a lot of speculation as to what this really means. So one of the key pieces that we talk about is home ownership, that we do have high values over home ownership. It means people are going to care for their property more. It means they are more likely to stay in our community, right? And Minnesota is very similar to Iowa in terms of home ownership values. We have high rates of home ownership in the upper Midwest, but we do know that those home ownership rates expect to decline. And it's like a lower home ownership rate is going to be the new normal. We're already starting to see rentals go on the uptick in just about every rural community. Now, when we look at the differentials here, so the red bars are the people over the age of 65. And what percentage of people over the age of 65 own their homes? And in 1996, it was 63%. By 2016, that's up to 77%. Well, if you've got more people over the age of 65 owning their homes, there are literally fewer homes available to be owned, which ultimately results in a decline in home ownership by the younger generation, because you have a finite number of homes, right? This is the key message here. Imagine your community, we'll just say, imagine, like, I lived in Hancock for a long time. Imagine we had 100 houses, right? And now we've got a good 15% more people staying in their homes. That's 15% fewer homes that are available for people basically to move in. So also just want to, I just saw a chat move there. I know Natalie had put a note in there, but if you guys have questions at all, please put them in chat, or even comments or notes or anything that you feel that is top of mind. Please feel free to share them. We want to build as much as possible here of a knowledge base as we can. So as we move forward, we also know there's going to be changes in terms of how our households look. And so we do know that, you know, especially with our senior populations, our households get smaller as spouses passed away. But we are also returning to multi-generational housing. And what I mean is this, there's this chart on the right. When I say return to multi-generational housing, what I mean here is like when your kids live with you, or you invite your mom to live with you because she's older, right? We're multi-generational households. And I say we're returning to this because I would make the argument that being a multi-generational household is the norm in this country. It wasn't until the 50s and 60s that we're like, you know, the only way for me to be successful is to move out of my parents' house, to get married and have my kids and be a nuclear household. That was the measure of success in the 50s and 60s. And you start to see the multi-generational households go way in decline in the following years, following this idealism that we have. But now, since the year 2000, those numbers are starting to bump up. When you look at the data, like I know this chart doesn't go back to 1900, but back then you would have over half of the households were multi-generational. We're starting to see a return to multi-generational households. But again, what does that mean? Like if I'm going to have my mom live with us and she can't get up and down the stairs, I don't have a, you know, a decent, a bigger, like Kathy had mentioned, do a big enough doorway in the bathroom for it to get the ramp, or to get the stroller in there. So it's really all these kinds of pieces that we want to think about when we talk about what does the composition of our house look like. The people within the house have changed. So you also see, like, who do 26-year-olds live with? Right now, parent is the number one. 30% of people who are 26 years old are now living with their parents. We're looking at where it was in the 60s, 70s, right? It was like 70% were with their spouse. We have done a complete 180 on what our composition of our households look like. But I think a lot of people tend to think in terms of nuclear households, right? The parents and the kids, and that is the measure of success. And I'll ask you to toss that out the window and truly reevaluate how we consider the composition of our homes and what that means. So there have been a few articles that talked about, like, holy cow, it looks like there's going to be a lot of homes on the market. Like, will housing take a hit? And really the great senior sell-off could cause the next housing crisis. Like, really imagine like a quarter of your owner occupied homes going on the market in the next 10 years. What if we didn't have enough buyers for them, right? Now, what's going to happen to your home values? Now, what's going to happen to mom's house where her house needs a lot of work as opposed to a house that doesn't need work? Now, which one is going to be prioritized in terms of purchase, right? So there's going to be a lot of homes going on the market that are going to have impacts on the choices that people make and when they move in. So I'm going to frame this, and I know we had titled this early on. You saw moving in, stay, and we're going to talk about staying put, but I call this moving in, moving out, and moving over. But now I want to frame this here in terms of moving in. And we talked about this already. There's a brain gain. We looked at all the reasons why people choose to move into our rural communities. It's not always about jobs. Sometimes they just want to live here and they've got a job somewhere else, but they love your town. We also want to talk about staying put and people staying in their house. And what does that look like? And I really want to hit on moving over, because for me, I'm not going to advocate for a single solution, but I'm going to advocate for a solution around consideration. And that is around moving out to other housing, because, you know, we're in the midst of this labor. I mean, just again, 9 months ago, like there was a labor shortage, there was a workforce housing shortage. And again, as I kind of mentioned in the last presentation, when you have people move over and you open up their house, that opens up workforce housing for you. That is economic development when we are providing an opportunity for a home to be put on the market at that point. So really, we're looking at moving in. As I mentioned, we talked about this before, the resident recruitment session. And if you haven't seen it, we're going to have all these made available to you. So I'm not going to kind of rehash the moving in piece. I hope that's okay. But really, we do know that there's kind of all these more rural areas of the country that have been experiencing a great gain. So when you look at, I know rural, like, is Des Moines rural? Like, well, to people living in New York, Des Moines is rural, right? So we've got a bunch of rural relativism going on. But when you look at the characteristics of a lot of these communities, they're considerably smaller metropolitan areas that the millennials are looking to move to. So we've got some preference changes from the younger generations in terms of where they want to live. They do not want to be in the big metros. I mean, they can barely afford an apartment in the metros at this point. But we've also got kind of this new economic narrative where people don't have to live where they work, right? We have remote workers. We have people that are 1099ers. We have self-employment. Some people hold multiple jobs in multiple communities, but we still have this very tight labor market. And meanwhile, our employers throw their arms up about lack of workforce housing. And they're like, hey, community, what are you going to do about this? I'm like, well, there's not a lot to do. We are in the middle of the pandemic where we can't just build housing because the price of lumber is 3 times what it was just a year ago. I mean, there are a lot of changes. So for me, I do not look at building new housing as a viable opportunity for a majority of our rural communities, because what are we going to build a house and it costs you $280,000 and it immediately gets appraised at 210, right? Like we just took a $60,000 or $70,000 hit. Like, unless that's your forever home, I don't know any economic developer that's going to write off $80, $60 to $70,000 on every house that gets built. So I want to focus on the housing stocks that we have. And before and I typically hear this, so I'm just going to respond to this now. I hear a lot of people say, well, geez, oh, these houses are so old. It was built like 1907. Like my house in Hancock was built in 1907. And like, I remind people, you know, the homes on the East Coast were built in like 1820. And they're still around. It's because we make sure that they're livable, they're habitable, they've got good bones, and you hear this a lot of times. So I just want to remind everybody that old is extremely relative, and I don't want to like a 30-year-old house is not old, but I moderate a home improvement sub on Reddit, and it's amazing how many younger people come in and be like, oh, my house was built in the 70s, it's just so old, I don't know how I'm going to keep it up, and I'm thinking like, man, 70s, I'd love to have like modern wiring in my home. I still have knob and tube, you know? So anyway, how we talk about housing becomes important, but we need to understand the dynamics between housing and jobs and be realistic about what that looks like. We have shifted economically to regional centers, and we hear this all the time that there aren't many housing options for the people who are working there. It really doesn't matter. Like, we can be a home without a job in the modern world. Your home is your job, and many of you today are working from your home/job in the same seat in your house. So we don't live in an economy, though, we live in a community. And we did talk about this with regard to resident recruitment, that really, if we're going to be welcoming new people in, we need to help people envision what their life is going to be like. Like the job, yeah, that's going to be great, you know, but they need to help see what when they're done with work every day and they go home to their house and they go to the lake fishing or they go out hunting, that this is what their life is going to be like. And you guys gave a ton of great contributions, and those are on Jamboard results. And we've got all those put up too, which will be on the website along with the PDF of the PowerPoint, all that kind of stuff. So, when I do talk about senior housing, I want to remind you that before the continuum of care, like, I don't want to just jump into continuum of care. Before continuum of care, there's a continuum of life that people have, right? Following retirement, for example, you've got a whole period of time that you don't need, you know, medical services. You're not in like, and you hear this all the time. Like, when I talk about people moving into a different home, it's like, well, I don't want to go into the senior home and go there with all the people that are going to die. Well, it's like, well, yes, I get that. Like, we're not talking about that. I'm just talking about a different home, right? You already heard how dicey that conversation could be with your parents, with your grandparents, about whether they want to talk about it or not. So, but really, retirees and seniors moving out of their homes, because almost all of the time, these homes are family homes. They may be 4-bedroom or, you know, 4-bedroom, 2-story, 2-bath homes. And then I was like, well, you know, your upstairs bathroom doesn't work, Grandma. And she's like, oh, that's fine. I don't go upstairs anymore. Like, that doesn't make it better. That doesn't make it better that your whole upstairs is becoming non-functional, right? So Some people are going to move out, and there's nothing you can do about this. Some people are going to have medical needs, and because of that, like in Hancock, we couldn't have people over that had many medical needs that couldn't be dealt with home visits, right? We didn't have a pharmacy, we didn't have a clinic in town. So at some point, people that do start approaching that continuum are going to move out because they are no longer able to safely live in that community. Some people are going to move out just because they want to be closer to their grandkids, and there's nothing you can do about that. You're not going to keep them in town. Like, hey, I don't want you to go see your kids. We got to keep you here. Like, so we have to be okay with some people moving out because that does, again, open up our housing stock. So really, I want to talk about the idea that some people stay put. And I'm going to argue here that many of these decisions are made around a policy of best intentions. And that is, I am going to live in my house forever is the policy, right? Well, how often does that work out? A majority of the times, it doesn't ever work out like that. But because we have this policy of best intentions, we do all this work inside of our homes to keep us living there forever, right? But there's a differential here, and there's a big impact, and that is we do have more people, the older generation today. So this is the older generation right now. These are people that were born in 1931 to 1941. And this is the home ownership rate for people before them. The previous generations, before this oldest generation that we have right now, these folks that are 70, 75 years old, before them, once you hit the age of 65, your home ownership rate, like at the age of 75 is down to 75%. Now we're down to 70%. Where today, the oldest generation is staying in their homes longer than any previous generation has, any previous generation. And this is where we're running into trouble and trying to understand why we have these workforce housing shortages that we didn't have with previous generations. This is it. People are staying in their homes longer than ever before. And you can look at the research is very up in the air in terms of like, well, you know, families aren't living together as much, right? The multi-generational households, or the kids are moving further away from their parents. So there are fewer opportunities for them to, you know, have family-oriented kind of moves, much less to have conversations with your parents about what they would like to do or where they would like to move. So there is all this kind of like this intention. But I would argue that people's intentions rarely turn out to reality, even when it comes to retirement. When you ask people, like, when do you expect to retire? Most people, like 38% of seniors say, oh, I'm not going to retire until I'm over the age of 70. But in reality, just 4% make it that long. 9% of seniors, of older people, had said they plan to retire under the age of 60. Like only 1 in 10 people are like, oh, I'm not retiring under the age of 60. In reality, almost 40% retire before the age of 60. There is a huge disconnect here. So I know you hear a lot of research around people are working longer than ever and all of that. Well, to some extent, but it really doesn't play out in the data. So what we had found is, and the way I kind of take this is there's a large differential between intentions and reality. And we need to try to bridge this gap between the non-realistic expectations that I think people have, where it's good to have goals and ideals, but it's another to kind of modify those along the way when you're encountered with new realities. So what we do know is that 90% of seniors intend to stay in their homes, but only 43% of those over the age of 70 thought it was easy to do there. They actually live that way independently. So why don't people move? Seniors say it's stress of moving, right? Fear of losing independence, anxiety over leaving the community, emotional ties to the home. We heard this in our breakouts too. Fear of the unknown. And I'll say, yeah, I get that. I understand why you're not wanting to move. But I'll remind you that right now, when you are making that move, it's in emergency mode. And all of those factors mentioned here are propagated and escalated tenfold. It is even more stressful. You're more fearful of losing your independence. You have very few choices at that point. And when you do have choices, they're considerably limited. Like when moving my grandma, like there was only one facility and it was 2 towns over when it was our emergency mode decision. She couldn't stay in town. She couldn't even stay in the next town over. She had to be 2 towns over from where she really wanted to be. So this becomes part of the consequence. So in many ways, like I like to share stories of failure to get people to motivate themselves. Like, it's like, right? Like, let's share the stories of how this really didn't go very well, because I don't want my mom to go through this. I don't want my neighbor's mom to go through this. Yes, there are success stories, but I think telling the stories of failure are the learning points here. So we also know that people find it much more difficult to live in their homes. You know, percentage of Americans with a disability in 2018, almost half of people over the age of 75 have some sort of disability, but meanwhile, they're staying in their homes longer than ever before. We do know that we have a lot of aging in place, right? So there's a concept out there called aging in place, but I think there's some confusion here. A lot of times people think aging in place means aging in their home, which isn't always the same thing, right? We did the survey in Hancock where we asked people in all the surrounding townships too, like, where do you want to live? And they would always say, I want to be in town. Like they weren't always as concerned about their house. For those that weren't, they were like, I just want to be in town. So anyway, meanwhile, many times we do have programs. I mean, we've got millions of dollars in programs to keep people in their homes right now. And it's cheaper, right? There's a lot of incentives to do so. And telemedicine, right? I mean, it's like 1954 view of what telemedicine is going like. So it's like telemedicine can work for some people too, where you've got broadband that can do that. So what's the impact on the home, right? So I'm again teasing out the difference between the people and the home here. So what's going to happen to the home? A lot of times, aging in your home long-term can lower equity. So right, if you don't take care of your home, ultimately your roof starts to go bad, your walls start to crumble, like your wiring doesn't get updated. This can actually lower the value of your home. It can lower the equity you have. And we're going to talk about this equity in just a minute here. And many times this can result in dilapidation. So I'm going to give you an example here. Like when I lived in Hancock, my house and my neighbor's house, Howard was like 82 when I moved in. He passed away when he was 96. God rest his soul. But literally our homes were built in the same year, but you would not know it. Our house was kept up. His house was not. He was on very low, very fixed income. He had been retired for years, right? But really, you walk just from the outside of the house, all the eaves had birds living in it. The roof was leaking. You walk into the house, all the lath and plaster is all run down and water stained, and the wiring I know wasn't updated. When he passed away, if it weren't for his daughter moving right into that house could have never been sold, and that house would have been given up, and they would have had to tear that place down. So now, I like to raise the question of what's the role of our public agents? What's the role of our city councils, of our economic developers? Usually they're like, well, why should I care? We're going to let Howard live in that house. That's his private decision, right? I want to remind you that that house is a community asset. So now making no decision, doing nothing has a cost. And here is what this cost is. So imagine now the county levy, right? You got a county levy. Let's say the county levy brings in $1,000 on every house, but then Howard's house gets torn down. And right, what happens when a house gets torn down? Your assessment value is only on the land because you don't have property on it anymore, right? Usually your assessment is based upon the two, the land and the property. But if the property's gone, the county is only going to levy on the land. Well, now, without the house, the county is only charging $200 for that parcel because there's no property there. Now, what's going to happen, right? That was an $800 loss. Does the county reduce its levy by $800 because Howard couldn't keep up his house? Nope. Who's going to pay for that other $800? Everybody else in town is now making up for the reduction in revenue from that one parcel. Right? I mean, this is blowing up here, but you see, like everybody else's taxes went to 12 to 66. Howard's went down on his parcel because the house isn't there anymore. There are some serious consequences to doing nothing in our rural communities, but doing nothing is an action, and inaction has a price to pay as well. So home equity really, for me, also persists as a measure of growing community wealth because your homes are a measure of community wealth. Your houses, I kind of differentiate a little bit between houses and homes. Houses are the house, where a home is with somebody in it. And it was a home to somebody before, it's a home to somebody today, it's a home to somebody in the future. But really, this home equity is not always seen as something to be tapped. So when I would talk to like, hey, Howard, have you ever thought about moving out? He's like, why would I move out? My home is paid off. Yeah, you have equity. Actually, it can be shifted into a different type of home, right? It's not an expense here. So we need to talk about that kind of financial shift as well. But we do know, why do people move? They want to downsize, reduce expenses, start a new chapter in life, move closer to family and friends, move into an age-friendly home. There's a lot of different reasons why people currently make the move. So I want to advocate for a moving over model. Because when seniors move over, this opens up the house for supply, right? We can welcome new people in, and at the same time, remember those inhibiting factors. We need to help people get over these factors as to why that move might not be good for them. But however, this move over decision during emergency mode only increases these stresses. I mean, I can't just say this enough. It's why I have it on 2 slides. Like, it is really so important for me to realize the impact this has on our people when you're having to make these decisions in emergency mode. When we could talk about building patio homes, we could talk about providing apartments or condos. So again, like patio homes, right? We had a group in Otter Tail County here up in Minnesota, which I presented on this data a couple of years ago, and there was a housing developer there that was like, no, I don't know, I'll try this out, right? He put up these fourplexes of he put up a fourplex, which was 2 bedrooms on the ends and 1 bedrooms in the middle, single floor living, patio homes, right? They sold the moment ground was broke. So he's like, well, I'll do another batch of 4. And he put those and they sold the moment ground was broke. I think if there's any opportunity to be developing new housing, this is where it's at. I still think there needs to be models of economic development to support this, because really economic developers tend to be hands-off housing. They tend to be like, hey, we need housing community, but I don't know how to deal with this. Though we have some businesses who have bought apartments. We have some businesses who have made, investments in loan pools or home rehab programs. So the private sector is starting to see that they have a role, but it's very episodic. It's not everywhere. It really is up to the owner and the managers of that business to really lobby for this type of work. But there's also an economic reason. Sorry, I just want to do a quick time check here. So we got a little bit of time. Well, I think we were 5 minutes over and we worked in some time. So just if you're a timekeeper like I am, we're gonna be good here. So really this move over housing. Now, again, why should economic developers care about this? Because, right, when we're talking about people who are 70, 75 years old, like, they're not in the labor force, right? But I want to talk about something which is retirement dollars and transfer receipts. There are 2 categories here, right? Retirement dollars are dollars that you're bringing in from your retirement, your old age Social Security, your private retirement accounts if you've got that. It's like a delayed paycheck. Like, Mark, you retired 20 years ago, but you're finally spending the money that you earned 30 years ago, right? So this is what retirement looks like. You're still spending pretty much all of those dollars though, right? Locally, you're spending on housing, on retail sales, on products, on services locally. But we've also got an item called transfer receipts. Transfer receipts are dollars brought into your county from old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These are federal transfers. This isn't the private retirement accounts like 401ks or Roth IRAs. This is, that like 2-pager you get from the Social Security Administration that's like, hey, when you retire, your amount is going to be $112 a month or whatever. Hopefully it's not that, but like whatever that amount is, right? That is this category of income. It is not the private retirement accounts. So when we look at the composition of all of the income that comes into your county, a part of this comes from a job. But a part also comes from transfers, these transfer receipts, old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We've also got dividends, interest, and rent. And when we look at the composition in Louisa Muscatine, roughly 65% of all dollars earned by people in the county comes from a job. Just 65%, I'll say. Because when I first ran this data, I could not even believe it. I was like, what? I thought people made a majority of their income in my county from working here. I thought it'd be like 80 or 90%. Look at this, like just over half of all the income. So there's all these other dollars flowing into your county from non-job sources. And the one we're going to pick apart here is transfer receipts. Well, almost 1 in 4 in Louisa and 1 in $5 in Muscatine are derived from transfer receipts. Old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those dollars get all spent locally, right? So old age Social Security gets to our individuals, but Medicare and Medicaid, imagine how many jobs you have today because of these transfer receipts coming in and paying for medical care through Medicare and Medicaid. Now, what happens if this is the big question. What happens if you don't have housing for seniors to move over to? They're going to move out. And if they move out, they're going to take these transfer receipts with them. Are you ready for, like, what if you lost half of your seniors in Louisa County and half of those transfer receipts are now gone? What's going to be the impact on your local economy then, on your clinic, on your hospital, on your pharmacy, right? All of these residual, much less all of the retail categories. So really, if there's no move over housing, folks will move out and take with them their transfer receipts. So we've got the charts here. This is the trends over time. Transfer receipts are only going to become more important. In Louisa County, it's up to 23%. But again, this doesn't include 401ks. This doesn't include Roth IRAs. Like the percentage of dollars coming in and flowing into your county from retirement is much larger than this. If you want to lose a lot of dollars in your community, have nowhere for people to move over to because they're going to move out and take these spending. This is spending power here. I hope this makes sense. I really do, because this is just a data source most people don't even think about, right? But I like to look at the mix of all income. Here's Muscatine, roughly the same trend. We've got a big bump up in Medicare, Medicaid, old age Social Security in roughly 2009, 2010, but it's still creeping up and will continue to creep up. Right now, transfer receipts make up $407 million every year in Muscatine. 103 million every year in Louisa County. So these are not small amounts here. So I like to look at the differentials to, again, make this economic argument. Why should economic developers care? It's because right now, and you look at all these surrounding counties too, the percentage of income that comes just from a job doesn't exceed, what, 67% on the highest end in Washington County. On the lowest end, it's 58% in Des Moines and Louisa. Now, percentage of income that comes from transfers, again, these are the counties where you've got in Johnson, you've got a smaller percentage of all the income that's coming from that. It tends to be inversely related to the income from a job. But you also notice that other category was dividends, interest, and rent. Rent is one of those areas that we're expecting to take a hit in this last year because of COVID too. So I'm not going to get into the rental part because this transfer receipt for me is much more vital. So really, we've also got the senior service economy. Imagine how many, like, your local economy is only going to become more integrated with like boomer related services and products, like senior related services and products. So we should want to retain these transfer receipts as a value, right? And moving over housing for me really is the opportunity. So I would get asked all the time, like, don't you have a workforce housing shortage? And my quick answer is, nope, we don't. We have plenty of workforce housing. It's currently occupied by our seniors. And over the next 5 to 7 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of those homes open up and we're going to be able to welcome in this new workforce. So again, we build supply in workforce housing by making the existing housing stock available to the next generation. So for me, housing is just the key as we move forward. A house is not just a private asset, but a community asset that actually persists over time, right? It's been a home to a previous generation as well. Well, we do have challenges. We have challenges around the house. Like we don't have a lot of data regarding the condition of the house, right? Like you can't tell much from driving by on the outside. Like it looks like the siding is bad, but you don't know anything about the wiring. You don't know anything about the plumbing. You don't know anything about the insulation. Like you can kind of estimate insulation by how many ice dams are on the house. And if you see tons of ice dams, you know there's no insulation in that house. Like there's that, but really what we end up with is a situation where seniors don't know much about their own home. So we hear these stories all the time that, all right, so Kathy, let's say, you know, we got to move your mom out. You know, I'm a real estate agent. And I'm like, hey, Kathy, your mom's house needs some work. You know, I know your mom did a lot of work. And you're like, and then Kathy's like, well, yeah, my mom put on a ramp on the house. We made the bathroom handicap accessible. We spent like $14,000 on this place in the past couple of years. Well, that's great, but that ramp is not really a selling point, really, to younger generations. That ramp really could be considered a community asset, not just a private asset. So really, and at the same time, like I know you updated the bathroom, but now you still have work to do. You have knob and tube wiring, and you can't even get knob and tube insured hardly anymore at a reasonable rate. So you're going to need to update the wiring. And Kathy, you're going to have to paint the house because if you want a first-time home buyer to be eligible to buy this house, you can't have a single speck of peeling paint. And to do those two things, the wiring and painting the house, it's going to cost you $12,000. And then Kathy's mom is like, well, I just spent $14,000 putting on the ramp and updating the bathroom. That's not an equity builder. That was a pure livability expense that you just made. So now, what kind of choice do you have? Either you update the bathroom or update the wiring or not. So really, we just have a lack of data regarding the condition of the inside of the house. So I almost advocate for, you know, Kathy, tell you what, we have this program in the county that we're just going to come in and assess your mom's home. And we're going to go down this checklist and show things that should or could be done. And this is, let's say, 3 years before any expected move. So you have an idea of what needs to be done to the house as you move forward. So what if you did have that inspection happen for free or at a low cost? But again, I've heard this before, that seniors are like, I don't want to do that because I don't want them to shut me out of my house. Like, I know that wire is bare downstairs and I can't risk that. I don't want anybody in here. We have to find a way to do this. We've got a severe lack of data regarding conditions inside the house. We have lack of data regarding intentions by those living in the house. And we have a lack of data regarding the needs of those that want to live in the house, right? We've also got a challenge with the people here. We heard this loud and clear, engaging seniors and their families. Like, is there a community level value you can put on this rather than just Kathy hoping to do this with her mom? Like, and again, I think Megan mentioned sometimes one of the best people to talk to your parents about a potential change is not one of your kids. It's another adult that will talk to them about, well, what do you like about this house? Oh, have you thought about this, right? So we have to think differently about how we do some of this work. We actually have to just think about this. How can we develop a program to help accommodate our seniors, either stay in their homes or move over to a home that's more friendly? So you can do focus groups, you can do surveys. Really, you do have aging in place strategies. There are people that want to stay in their house. There are people that don't want to stay in their house, but still want to stay in town. And what can we do for them? The number one thing for me is, and I have this on the bottom here, is appeal to a sense of continuity for people's families and the community, especially for the senior in that home. Because if you go back to the rural narrative, and I would hear this all the time early in my research when I'd interview seniors, is seniors would say, why should I bother moving out of my house? Our town's dying. Nobody wants to live here. It's like, oh my gosh, I've got a list of a dozen people who would love to move into your house, right? So I want to, again, when I have these conversations with seniors, it's like, hey, I've done interviews with thousands of people who would love to move into your community. They want to move into your community for what you are today. They want to live in your house. So to remind seniors that, yes, your house was great for you. Your house was great for the generation before you in that house. We hope it's going to be great for the next generation, and we'd like you to hand it off, right? This is appealing to that sense of continuity. So we've also got a challenge around the people not here yet. Can we expand the conversation about housing in the community, engage newcomers around what their preferences were? How did their housing searches go? How did they find even a house to buy? Like we tell people now, because many of our homes don't even go on the market today. It's like, Kim, I know you and your husband are thinking about selling your house. My wife and I have always loved your house. So we're going to take you out for a meal. We're going to talk about your house. And then like a month later, you're moved out, we're moved in, and that house never hit the market. This is the most common way we see home sales going today. So anyway, there's just kind of all these nuances to the conversation we want to have, but we have to engage people. And this isn't like I mentioned, this isn't the sexiest work out there, is having these very, very difficult conversations about what we intend to do with the last chapter of our lives in many ways. And what's going to happen? Where do you want to be? What's going to make you happy? What can you give on and what don't you give on, right? But I think the key here is opening up conversation. So we are ready for we've got 2 breakouts coming up. The first one, you're going to be put into a breakout with your county folks, because there are county programs out there already that exist with regards to either people in their homes or the home itself. And then we're going to reconvene after that. We're going to do that for, I believe, 10 minutes. We're going to break into those. And then we're going to reconvene and we're going to re-break out into conversations. And we'll go over that breakout in a minute. But that is the Idea Factory is the second breakout, where you got ideas for how to help people. If you guys have ideas for how to help our homes, if you don't want to lose your ideas, put them into chat. Or just write them on a scribbled piece of paper, but don't lose your ideas, because you are the energy for how we move forward. So we've got these county breakouts. I'm not sure how we do the handoff here.